now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
A 12-year labor of love. Jonathan Livingston Seagull, A Solo Flight, is a solo performance adapted from Richard Bach's book and performed by Andrew Thacher, and it's currently playing at Atwater Village Theatre. Andrew Thacher, welcome to Animal Farm.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You are performing in a piece you have adapted, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, A Solo Flight, that's playing through March 27th at the Atwater Village Theatre.
Yes.
And this is a labor of love based on a book that you loved. And even before we get to Jonathan Livingston Seagull, let's get some sense of your background as a performer. And
Sure.
Let's start there.
Well, I've always been a bit of a show off. It's probably because of my massive insecurity. But like many, I started in school. You know, I did the school plays, and I sang in chorus, and I played instruments and music.
You're meaning high school?
High school, yes, yes. Actually, my first musical was 8th grade, middle school. They needed someone to step in and be part of the chorus on Teen the Musical. And my mother, like,
why would a middle school do something like that?
I don't know. It's a mystery, but for us, it was a big deal. And, we did it in our cafeteria, which had a stage. It's one of those, the all-purpose rooms. But I had wanted to. I'd grown up with musical theater and classical music and jazz music from my parents' influence. Both my parents had musical backgrounds in their families. My mother's dad was a music educator and a composer and lyricist, and my dad's mom was a concert pianist who was on the verge of a concert career when she was a young woman, and taught at the University of Oregon. Anyway, so that was always part of my DNA, as it were, growing up. And my brother too, he's a performer too. He's in the music business. And it's always been something that I've loved, even though, you combat your fears and your doubts. For me, it's been a pathway to finding more about myself. I know that sounds kind of, I don't know if this is the word pedantic. I'm not sure. I'm trying to use the right words, but it's true. Until you're up there naked, as it were, in front of an audience, you don't really know things about yourself until you're challenged in that way. And this play, when we'll dive more deeply into it, I'm sure, this play definitely challenges me in every way. And that's something that I've learned to love, that feeling of, oh boy, we got to step it up. We got to bring our A game, our A, B, C, and D game.
Have you done performances such as this on the professional stage prior to Jonathan Livingston Seagull? I
have. I started out. My first professional work was in college. I studied acting and
where
I sang.
Was that? Where was that?
Was in Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good school for me. It was a small liberal arts school and just what I was looking for. And I had a lot of opportunities there. One of them was the summer of 1990. I had some scholarship money and I was able to participate in a study program in Japan. Mm-hmm. I had become fascinated with all things Japanese, specifically with Japanese theater, the No and Kabuki and Bunraku, and Kabuki especially just captivated me. And I was able to see a performing troupe in DC at the Kennedy Center, and I thought, I've got to learn more about this. And so Japan and Japanese studies and cultural studies were things that I was just fascinated by. And I was acting and I was performing. Mm-hmm. So I had this opportunity to go to Sendai, to Tohoku Gakuin University in Sendai with a group of students for a few weeks. And it was a marvelous adventure. And we went to classes, of course, and we took day trips and saw all sorts of sites and locations, but we also stayed with host families.
Yes.
So being in the host family was actually one of the most wonderful parts of it, because you're there in the daily walk and talk of this normal family going about their daily routine. So you get to touch that and be a part of that to a degree. And that was in a way more educational than anything we did in the classroom.
Yeah.
And definitely solidified my desire to go back. I was there 5 weeks in 1990, and there was a very full summer. And I went back after I graduated college. I had the opportunity to go back and move to Tokyo. I stayed with relatives who were working at the embassy for a little while, and then was able to strike out on my own.
Do you speak any Japanese? Or?
It's rusty, let me tell you.
So you were able, when you talk about those family interactions of this,
yes.
this prime example of true cultural exchange,
Yes.
you were able to converse somewhat in the native language.
Yes, indeed. And the folks that I met and became friends with, and many who became like family, were very patient with me and helpful. I think if anyone has an experience like that in any culture, if they show a desire to learn, people will open their doors. That's been my experience anyway. Mm-hmm. So I certainly had that opportunity, spending, say, New Year's with families. The families that I'd stayed with before, I went and visited them when I lived there. New Year's is like the Japanese version of our Christmas in a way. It's the family time when family gathers and things like that, and participating in the ceremonies and the family traditions and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I moved back to Japan and stayed there for 4 years, and ended up working in English teaching, radio and television broadcasting. NHK, Nippon Hoso Kyokai, which is like ABC or NBC here. They have a very large language teaching division, and English, of course, is a major part of that. And I was able to audition and get involved in radio and television programs that taught English conversation. And mostly as an actor, I would act out little scenes or little conversations, and then the teachers would pick apart our conversations and use them as the teaching moment of the day, as it were.
See, everybody thinks theater is just supposed to be on a stage, and I think you're making a very good case of the multiple purposes of this nonsense, this games of pretend that we play.
It's true. Sometimes it does seem like nonsense when there's so many terrible things happening in the world. A friend of mine who is, she went to law school and has worked for social justice and has worked, clerked with judges and done all kinds of work to help elevate society, as it were. I remember saying to her, gosh, you do all this important work and I'm just down here in LA doing my little TV bits. And she said, no, what you do is important too. What actors do is important, because they transport people, and they also give people a chance to see themselves and tell stories that are necessary, and some also just to entertain, to pull people away from their lives. You certainly do
transport people in Jonathan Livingston Seagull. You transport them not just beyond the Atwater Village stage, but right out there into the cosmos. So absolutely true.
And I have a blast doing it, I'll tell you the truth.
So let's get to your first. What attracted you? You said you haven't seen the movie, which was what, 1973 was the movie.
73, yeah.
Richard Bach's book came out in 1970, I believe. And
yes, indeed. 1970 was published, 73, and there's also an audiobook. It was an album. Richard Harris read the book.
Yes.
There's clips and things on YouTube, as there always are. But I think when this is done and when I have a break from the show, maybe I'll sit down and watch the movie, just out of curiosity's sake. Stephen, I know Richard Bach himself, as I've read, does not like has sort of disavowed the movie. And I just,
if I may say, with good reason, I'm on the side, but yeah, I
just felt like I didn't want what Paramount did, what Mr. Bartlett did, to color what my approach would be.
You said you had not even seen the movie when you conceived this performance, and you still haven't seen it.
I still haven't seen it. I've intentionally not seen it because there will be a time. I'm curious, but I just didn't want their vision, Hal Bartlett's vision, to affect what I was doing. I wanted what I was doing to come right off the page, to be inspired by what I have on the page, because for me it begins and ends with the book. And I read the book for the first time when I was 26. So many friends had recommended it to me. And I finally sat down and read it and reread it again and again and loved it. And what I started doing was something that my father did for me and his father did for him, was read to people. My brother and I would snuggle up with my dad on the couch, and he'd read to us. He'd read the Oz books that he grew up with and other books. And eventually that seeped into me, and I started reading out loud, reading to him, reading to other people. And so Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's a nice little hour 15 read. So I could sit down with someone and read them the whole book through. And I did that many times until about 2008. I started tinkering with the idea of doing a solo show of some kind. I'd seen a number of them. I'd read about them. I had taken some classes and was curious if there was something that I could do.
May I intervene just for a quick question?
Yeah, please.
And that is, in your attraction to the book, but the narrative point of view of the book is so much more interesting than the narrative point of the movie, which really goes from, it's as though Jonathan's view is it. And that sort of, there's a centrality on this central character, this central seagull, whereas there's something about the narrative voice in the show and in which comes straight from the book, in which it flips around, so you get a much more holistic view of the theology he's talking about. We'll get to that later.
Sure.
But please continue. I just want to.
Well, no, that's all good. That's all good points. I like what you're saying, because it's true. The book, well, I would read the book over and over to folks, and love doing that. I love reading to people in general. I'll sit down and read anything to you if you want. But I thought, well, I wasn't ready. I didn't feel ready to write something. I didn't feel capable of writing, and that may change someday, but I wanted, so I thought, well, what can I adapt? I must be able to adapt something. And Jonathan seemed like the obvious choice. In the 1970 version anyway, it's a nice 3-act structure. It's not too long, so I didn't feel I would need to cut it down significantly, if at all. And so I started tinkering with it. I started adapting the text, and that was a challenge, because you probably know the phrase, "You kill your darlings."
Mm-hmm.
There are so many phrases and moments in the book, descriptive moments, that I realized over time, and this was a process of years, that I would have to remove them, that I would need to show these things on stage rather than tell them. And they became unnecessary. And it was difficult to cut that down, because again, I loved the book so much. So treating the book as its own thing, and eventually evolving the show into its own thing, and yet that they're so complementary. The show is a very faithful adaptation of the book. It's not a rewrite. It's not a major edit.
Yes, I noticed that when I read the script. Have you been in touch with Richard Bach about this at all?
I have. The journey to this was quite long. 2012, I was made concerted efforts to develop it for the Hollywood Fringe. Yeah. But I still couldn't find out who I could talk to about the rights. I contacted Simon & Schuster. I tried to get through to them, and they're very busy, I guess. They didn't respond to my repeated inquiries. And so I had to set that aside. And there wasn't an agent or a manager or a lawyer for Richard Bach that I could just call up and say, hey. And so it took years. And then there were times when I set it aside, and I would bring it out and perform it and so forth. It was during COVID, during the height of COVID in 2021, January, that I decided, well, I got to do something. I want to do something creative, and I've got Jonathan, and let's do it. That's when I got together with a couple friends, and I performed the first section for them, and they were very pleased to see it, and they had some wonderful ideas, and we thought that we might develop it as a film, as a feature film.
Okay, I'm gonna be a stickler here. You're in the middle of 2021. It's a January of 2021. So we're a year into the epidemic. Did you do this on Zoom, or did you do this in person?
We did it in person, social distance, outside.
Okay.
Yeah, we were careful. We were all vaxxed and relaxed and all that good stuff. We had done our due diligence. Yeah. But it's difficult when you're doing theater. It's so difficult because you want to get together and create. And
right.
Anyway, we could talk about that for hours. But so yes, thankfully, my director Paul Millay, he was very generous in us using his backyard, his courtyard in the back of his house to do rehearsals and to talk through things. But the ideas were flashing back and forth. It was wonderful. And I thought, well, at the very least, let's make a fan film and let's do it up and do it right. and then at least I can say I've done this. And, after 10 years, more than 10 years, 12 years, 13 years, I can be done with it to a degree. But it was pointed out, and we'd made a lot of progress. We'd scouted locations, and we'd made up shot lists, and we'd done the whole thing. So it was pointed out that, well, this intellectual property someone could still send you a cease and desist letter, even though this is a fan film. And I've done this long enough where sometimes I'm surprised at how ignorant I can be and naive, because I was thinking, well, this is just for fun and I love it and it's okay. But that's in your little bubble of wanting and wishing.
And then the letter from the lawyer comes. Yeah.
Exactly. Thankfully, we never had that happen, because we only took it to a certain point. And then I realized, okay, yes, of course, I need to be respectful and do my duty and find out what the heck is going on with the rights and what I can and can't do.
Because they're not going to use, I couldn't get a hold of him as an excuse.
Oh my goodness, no. I knew that. And I didn't, I knew that this book was important. It would have been, imagined it was incredibly important to Mr. Bach. And it wasn't something that he would just say, oh, sure, then I don't care. That would have been incredibly disrespectful, not to mention illegal. So, not to go too much into the details of it, but I did some online sleuthing, and before too long, I found myself in touch with Mr. Bach and with his wonderful wife, and they were very generous and patient with me. And they said, well, okay, this sounds like an interesting. I pitched them my idea, and they said, well, this sounds interesting, but we'd like to read your script. And they wanted to make sure that I hadn't done anything untoward with the character. Specifically, so we want to make sure you haven't turned Jonathan into a chain-smoking womanizer, which was ha ha ha. I was knocked out by that. I thought, well, this is great. These are my kind of folks. I mean, this is all we can laugh about it, but we still have to be serious about it. So I appreciated that. So I sent it to them, and I asked them about the filming. I said, well, I thought maybe I could also film this, and I was told no filming. No filming of any kind, because they are developing Jonathan in that way themselves. And so they didn't want any filming of a performance to be out there in the world, even for my private use, which I respect. I mean, there was disappointment, but at the same time, I understood where they were coming from. And so I wanted to be respectful to that. And we have been. And they read the script. A week later, I got an email back saying, we like it. You have our permission to perform it in the ways that you've outlined. And I told them about the shows that I wanted to do. And it was like Christmas morning. It was just, this relief. But after so many years of this being something that I sort of had on the back burner and sometimes would bring out and show people, it also felt like, okay, this is very natural. This is the next thing. Because there'd been so much disappointment about it for so long that I'd kind of got used to that feeling.
Yeah, welcome to the theater.
Yes, indeed. So to have their permission and their support was just, it was everything. And I knew where I couldn't go. But what's wonderful about that is if you know the boundaries and you are respectful of those boundaries, the sky's the limit within those boundaries. You can go wherever you need to and want to. Yes. And that's what we've done with the play. Yeah. We've taken it to this wonderful place that I never could have imagined.
Have they either seen any part of it? Have they flown out?
They have not. Apparently, that's not going to happen coming down to Los Angeles, which I wish they could, but I totally understand why not. But of course, I've been in regular contact and have. They actually found your review before I had a chance to send it to them. I was going to send it to them, but they read the review and they were very pleased that you enjoyed the show and all the good things you had to say, and which I so appreciate, Stephen. We really do. And I sent them photographs, of course, and all the news that I could, and our program, which we have online. So they've been definitely, and also I sent them a T-shirt. I'm wearing my T-shirt today, which are not for sale, in case anyone's asking. I don't have licensing for them. These are just keepsakes for the folks who've been involved with the show. So I sent them both a T-shirt, which they were very pleased to receive.
Nice. I wanted to close on the one quibble I had is not with your performance at all, but probably it may be related to your attraction to the book, and that's the theology in the story itself,
Sure.
which is really underscored in the movie. It's handled much more nimbly by the book and by you, and that is simply also Jonathan Siegel, even as written, does not seem to have much of a sense of humor. He does become he becomes a guru of sorts, teaching metaphysics to the other seagulls. And what you have done, there's just a wistfulness in your performance, in a twinkle in the eye, where Jonathan is not quite as self-important in the in your portrayal of him as he was, it's certainly in the movie, and perhaps even in the book. So the objection I had is it was a prevailing philosophy from the 60s. The book came out in 1970, and there's and that's that you can overcome any impediment with the power of your mind, and that is essentially what underscores that is the philosophy. Even death, you just imagine yourself in another place, and poof, and life is existence, I should say, is an elevator ride where you just keep going up to a new plane. And I think I'm just temperamentally more skeptical than that.
I appreciate that, sure.
Especially this week, and it doesn't need this week to illustrate that, but the refugee crisis in Ukraine, and the bombings, and simply to tell those people, I'm sort of recapitulating, please forgive me, I'm recapitulating what I wrote in the review, but simply to tell those people, come on, just imagine you're in Poland and you'll be in Poland, which is kind of what Jonathan eventually ends up preaching to his underlings. I'm just wondering how you, and argue back with me, please. I feel free. I'm not being pedantic. This is just how it hit my nerve center. So argue back with me and tell me I'm wrong. I'd be happy to hear.
Stephen, your point of view is your point of view based on your experience and your way of looking at the world, and I respect it. I think, quite honestly, the book is much more and much less than what you're described.
Do say.
I don't think it is. I think it is much less humorless than you imagine. I've certainly injected quite a bit of humor into the show as the narrator. The narrator has a point of view as well. And there are humorous moments that we've definitely expanded upon in the performance.
Yeah.
So I believe the book is actually filled with humor in that they are seagulls, yes, but it is an examination of the human condition. In a sense, it's an allegory for the human condition. And if you look at the book from the beginning and Jonathan's journey through to when he disappears at the end, spoiler alert, he starts off, as we all do, as a child, as a young person, struggling and doing something that, to use the language of say a younger person, or the language of anybody who's a fanboy, as it were, this is so cool, man. I love doing this. This feels great. Okay, take that. And
I'm going to clarify for people who have not seen the show or maybe not be familiar with the book. What the seagull does is engage in a series of acrobatics and aeronautics as a seagull, which are kind of daredevil-like.
What he does, yes, that's one way of putting it. What he does is he practices to perfect what everyone else takes for granted.
Yes.
All his fellow seagulls take flight for granted. This is what we do so we can eat, so we can live, so we can exist. What Jonathan wants to do is truly live in what he loves to do, which is to fly. And it seems obvious. Well, of course, a seagull flies, but of course, a human being walks and speaks. But what if a human being took those standard everyday things and practiced them?
The question raised by the book, which is just a lovely question among its many, many virtues, is why does a seagull fly?
That's true. And I actually spoke with a wonderful, she's a PhD candidate Her name is Christina Harvey, and she's at the University of Michigan. She's on the verge of getting her PhD, and it's all about aeronautics and bird flight and the physics of bird flight. And we had a wonderful conversation, and she helped me examine all the details about birds and seagulls in general, gulls. And so we discussed the mechanics of bird wings and airflow. And I also spoke with a former naval pilot who's a commercial pilot, and we discussed aeronautics and the daredevil things that Jonathan did. And we went through all of it. So having those expert perspectives on the mechanics of all of it was eye-opening and very enriching. So we did examine those things, and that's what Jonathan's doing. And for me, what Jonathan has always wanted to do and be is the best version of himself. Now, that's very, for me, that's very ground level. That's very,
yeah, I agree,
on the ground. That's not this highfalutin, oh, it's off here in the airy fairy, in the cosmos. It's a daily practice. It's a daily struggle and striving to lift yourself out of what the world is trying to tell you that you are, yes, which is limited.
Yes.
The world tells you that you're limited. And look at anybody, look at Simone Biles, the greatest gymnast of all time, mm-hmm, or, Luciano Pavarotti, or any great person who's raised their art and their ability to the highest level.
Or Volodymyr Zelensky, for that matter.
Boy, you got to have to tell me who that is.
The president of Ukraine.
Oh my goodness.
Whose approval ratings were at 25% last October.
Put him in charge.
I mean, they're now at 95%. Yeah.
My goodness. I mean, we don't know the whole story, but what he's putting out there is what we need to hear, and the leadership that human beings deserve to have. Certainly the Ukrainians, God knows, God love them. But anyway, so no, for me, at the highest level, it's like technology. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, Mm-hmm. So if someone is operating at a very high level metaphysically, I think it's a mistake, to be quite honest, to think that that's just something they clicked into. Jonathan takes his whole lifetime to get to a point where he can make a leap to a higher place, because he's been going step by step to that higher place through his daily practice. Yes, that's the watchword, especially in the third section where he works with students. Practice. You have to do it every day, sometimes for hours at a time or throughout the day, and constantly turn your thought towards that perfection, not to be perfect, but to work towards the point
to attain it. To attain. Yeah.
And also in the second section, when he's working with Chang, his guru, as it were, his great teacher, Chang, who, the way I see Chang, is a total badass. He's not like, oh, I will teach you the secret ways. It's like, so you like to fly, huh? You're fast. Well, let me help you out with this, kid. It's going to be awesome. Don't worry. It's great. For me, all the characters have to be grounded in a sense of reality and not be impressed with themselves. Because in the third section, when Jonathan goes back to his earthly home, there's so many gulls who are just, oh, it's the son of the great gull, the great teacher. It's like, no, I'm just a bird who likes to fly, man. Come on, let me help you. I'll give you some lessons and we'll practice. We'll practice and practice. And so the path, as I see it, the path is through the daily struggle, the daily denying of self, and working on your technique, practicing and maintaining that sense of joy in what you're doing. That's what it's been like for me to do Jonathan. I mean, having to repeat and practice my lines hundreds and hundreds of times. I've had so many people say, how did you memorize those lines? For some folks, it's like, that's incredible. I could never do that. And it's like, yes, you could. I believe so.
Yeah.
If you really wanted to and were willing to put in the time and the effort and the work, you could get to a higher point in your mastery of this thing. And for me, metaphysically, that's what Jonathan has done. So it's not wish and it'll make it happen, as I see it. It's let's work. And more and more, you will understand and see that there are higher and greater levels of demonstration of your mastery of flight, which eventually is, boom, you're there. Because, it's seeing yourself as your true identity, as Chang says, as perfect as an unwritten number, everywhere at once across space and time. Now, not everyone is in agreement with that.
Mhm.
Many folks believe that the material world is the only reality, and I totally respect their point of view. I could totally see their point of view. I struggle with that idea myself because we see the news, we have the cares of our lives every day. We feel tired, we feel old, we feel depressed. How can there be anything more than this, flash bag, as it were?
Yeah.
But that's up to you. But even within the life that we have on this earth, if this is all we are, even this is something that can be improved.
Yeah.
Through daily practice, through daily struggle.
So I guess the takeaway, or a takeaway, is one road to enlightenment is rehearsal. Is pretty
It's
much
true. You want to
Yeah.
even I studied Aikido in Japan, and one of the sayings, one of the quotes from the O sensei, the great teacher, the great master, was, even the old man must still train and train. There is no place where you arrive. Even Pavarotti had a voice coach and practiced 100 times a day, and he was the greatest in his time.
Jonathan Livingston Seagull, A Solo Flight, is being performed at Atwater Village Theatre through March 27th. Andrew Thacher is the solo performer taking that solo flight. Andrew, thank you so much for joining.
It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Next week, we meet Kelly McBurnett Andronicus, the award-winning playwright, who's the West Coast premiere of her play, The Hall of Final Ruin, is currently playing at Ophelia's Jump in Upland.
If you enjoy Animal Farm, please support us on Patreon.